Welcome to the ALMANAC podcast. My name is Christine Gelineau, and I'm the author of ALMANAC, A Murmuration, published by Excelsior Editions of State University of New York Press. For those who might be wondering, a murmuration is that phenomenon where a congregation of individual birds bursts into the air in fluid, swirling patterns that form, dissolve, reform, reverse, dip, and rise, describing with the path of their flight the air currents and their own acrobatic abilities. My book, Almanac, is a memoir that is held together by that thread of autobiography, but that along the way engages with a good many issues, a murmuration of topics, one could say. Almanac considers the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, the stories we fashion about how we matter as a nation, and the stories we weave about our relationships with other than human animals, and with the endangered natural world we are a part of. And it does so within the framework of the seasons, within the context of the beauty of this world. In keeping with the wheel of the seasons that helped to organize this book, I plan for 4 podcasts, one each at the spring equinox, the summer solstice, the autumnal equinox, and the winter solstice. In each episode, I'll be hosting guests whose own interesting projects intersect with one or more of the themes within Almanac, for what we hope you'll find to be an engaging conversation on that episode's topic. Thank you for joining us today. So this is episode 4 of the Almanac podcast, Winter Solstice 2025. Today I'm happy to be hosting Rebecca Hart Olander. Rebecca is a poet, teacher, and the editor and director of Perugia Press. She's the author of a chapbook and 2 full-length collections of poetry. Uncertain Acrobats, her debut collection, was released by Cavern Press in 2021, while Singing from the Deep End, also from Cavern, will officially be published February 3rd, 2026, but it's available now for pre-order. Rebecca taught composition, creative writing, and poetry at Westfield State University in Western Massachusetts for 12 years. She's twice served as James Merrill Visiting Poet at Amherst College and twice taught a winter term course at Smith College on the art and business of poetry. She has provided outside reader advice to MA and MFA students as they completed their degrees in the Maslow Family Graduate Program in Creative Writing at Wilkes University, and participated in Residency Week editors' panels there. Perugia Press, where she's been editor-director since 2016, focuses on introducing the first or second books by emerging women poets, and today we'll be focusing our conversation on the topics of publishing, literary citizenship, which is to say, building the community in which literature can flourish. So, welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you.
We'll start with a perennial question for editors is, what are you looking for? And the perennial answer to that is, looking for work of the highest caliber that's going to engage and excite readers. And I think pretty much all editors feel that way. But what readers are really looking for is like that next level down as to what you're looking for in terms of letting an aspiring writer know whether or not a particular press has a likelihood of being a good fit for their work. If you'll permit me, I'd like to say a few things about my impression of what Perugia is looking for, and then certainly we're most going to want to hear from you about that. Your own first collection of poetry has that wonderful title of Uncertain Acrobats, and you've described the book, there you go, as having been written about your father at the end of his life and in the time after his loss. So an illness and grief narrative in poems. Thomas Q. Moran's blurb for the book says that you use, quote, the trampoline of memory to somersault between here and the past, the living and the dead. So for me, that comment brought to mind Richard Wilbur's 1956 poem, Love Calls Us to the Things of This World. I want to just put that poem up here. Sorry for the delay there. So this is Love Calls Us to the Things of the World by Richard Wilbur. Um, so it's a bit of a tangent, but I think it will help me to make my point clear. I think of Wilbur's poem as a poem about the meaning of life, or at least what brings a sense of meaning to individual lives, that ultimate question we face in times of illness and loss. The poem was apparently written while Wilbur and his wife were living in Rome for a time, and it begins with him being pulled from sleep by the screech of a clothesline pulley. And he opens his eyes to see sheets and shirts billowing against the blue Roman sky. And for a moment, that lovely moment when we first awaken and the world seems new and promising, in that morning has broken moment, he sees the laundry as the air all awash with angels. Inevitably, of course, you wake up further and remember what you know about the world, and in Wilbur's words, reluctantly face the punctual rape of every blessed day. But that's not where Wilbur leaves us. As the sun acknowledges with a warm look the world's hunks and colors, the soul descends once more in bitter love to accept the waking body, Wilbur tells us. As the title makes clear, it might be bitter love, but love calls us back to the world, to the life we're in the midst of. Um, because he's in Rome, the poem ends with Wilbur kind of looking out the window and he catching sight, apparently, of a couple of nuns walking down the street. And he, the poem to me, those last most memorable lines about the heaviest nuns who walk in a pure floating of dark habits, keeping their difficult balance. And that difficult balance is what I was working to get towards. Your poems and the poems in the books that Perugia publishes bring us a wide variety of experiences and of temperaments, but they share that quality of looking squarely at the world, uh, at the punctual rape of every blessed day, but also the halcyon feeling of, um, in Wilbur's words, clear dances in the sight of heaven. Um, so can any of us who are alert to our own inner lives help but being uncertain acrobats, navigating the difficult balances between trauma and peace, despair and joy? So that's one of the crucial things I see uniting the books of Perugia. And the second would be the conscious decision to interrogate those difficult balances from a wide range of perspectives. I just listened to, have you read Robin Wall Kimmerer's wonderful book, Braiding Sweetgrass? I
I
listened,
know of it, and I have heard passages, but I have not read
yeah,
the whole
I
thing.
was in that situation for a long time too, but I just listened to the audiobook version, which I'm really glad I did because Kimmerer herself includes, she narrates it herself, and she includes in the book quite a lot of her family's mother tongue of Potawatomi, as well as Kimmerer has lived for a long time in the Syracuse, New York area, so there's some Haudenosaunee in there as well. And I would never have been able to pronounce those passages, and it was lovely to hear her speaking them. The book is a wonderful evocation of the truth that we perceive the world through language, and that different languages organize those perceptions differently from one another. What a speaking group finds the need to have words for is revealing about that culture, as is like denotation versus connotation, what connotations the words have. But it's the grammar that most reveals a way of organizing the perceived world. So to speak in Potawatomi is to see the world differently than to speak it out in English. And because of her experiences and her study, Kimmer is able to reveal parallels and contrasts that those of us without her breadth of experience might well have overlooked. So far as I know, none of the Perugia books have all been in English. But my point here is that you do actively seek out writers able to expose readers to fresh perspectives on the world, discovering abilities to navigate, life's difficult balances in ways the reader might not previously have encountered. So I appreciate your patience in letting me, go on about what I think you're looking for in manuscripts that are right for Perugia. But certainly feel free to disagree, agree, expound. But how would you describe what you're looking for in books from Perugia?
Oh, thank you, Christine. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here in your final edition of the Almanac series that you've been doing this year. I'm really honored to be joining you today.
Oh, it's
Um,
my privilege.
Thank you. I also just want to say thank you for bringing my book into conversation with Richard Wilbur and Robin Kimmerer. That's just beautiful. Um, I remember in your second edition, so I guess it was the spring. Um, I believe your guest, you brought up Toni Morrison, and she was like, "Oh, thank you for putting my book in the
Right,
same
right. That was,
sentence as
yeah, Jamie
beloved."
Colbert. Yeah.
So that's just a beautiful thing that you do, and I appreciate that. So yeah, Uncertain Acrobats, I feel I think you just captured that just right. In terms of the swinging back and forth between the hard and the joyful parts of life and trying to show all of that. That's certainly what I'm about in my work. So to get to your question about Perugia and what we're looking for to kind of, I hear what you're saying that writers want to kind of have the curtain pulled back and see, you
Hmm.
know, the wizard and like, is there a trick to what they're looking for there? And just yeah, we have a contest, so people want to send to us knowing that their submission is going to be well taken care of, and um, so. I would say we just take really seriously caring for our books, for our submissions. We're thinking about each poet and who is behind each submission that comes in, and um, our readers are instructed to read with love and expansiveness. So to kind of bring in that love again. Um, so, and I do have to say, first of all, it's true for us as it is for, you said, for most, that a publisher's first response is work that's incredibly strong in terms of craft, work that engages and draws in readers. So that's all true here as well. Um, and I just want to say you are one of that team of readers.
Hmm.
So to pull back the curtain there, Christine has been a volunteer reader for years now for Perugia. We have a robust team of volunteer readers and judges. So I want to thank you for that generous active literary citizenship. I know we're going to circle back to community and literary
Right.
citizenship
Right.
later, but thank you for being part of that in terms of Perugia.
I love that every manuscript that comes into Perugia gets more than one. In other words, if I choose to push forward certain manuscripts, somebody else is looking at all those manuscripts also to make sure everybody's getting a good consideration.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So we have a reading period. I'm going to explain that to listeners since you already kind of know. We publish just one book a year. So that's a kind of unique part of our mission. It's the winner of our annual national contest. It is what we're looking for is emerging women poets, and that's inclusive of gender expansive identities who have not published more than one full-length collection. So we're looking for helping to launch the careers of new women poets. We do seek to highlight marginalized and underrepresented voices in our publications. So we're trying to welcome and encourage submissions written by poets of all abilities, ages, sexual orientations, from across cultural and socioeconomic, ethnic, racial, religious backgrounds, all of that. We want folks to feel like their voice is welcome. And we read anonymously in a collaborative process that you were starting to describe. Our team is more than 60 volunteers, readers and judges. Like you said, two readers are on every manuscript at every stage. So the manuscripts that make it to the end of that process, those are those that have appealed to a wide range of different readers. And they're already extremely strong and realized as collections. Um, we think that the books we end up choosing as the winners of the Perugia Press Prize and those books that we end up publishing represent the breadth and the depth of women's voices. So in some ways, we're not really looking for a particular story or voice. We're looking for over time to represent the multitudinousness of women's voices. Um, that said,
Hmm.
as you have noticed, after being a reader for many years, there are commonalities across our books. Um, so they often share themes of multi-layered identity, that might be experiences of being multiracial, multilingual. Um, they often are reflecting on traumas and triumphs of diaspora. They both interrogate and celebrate, I would say, ideas of motherhood and girlhood and womanhood. And those are just a few things that ripple through. And it's really interesting you brought up languages because, yes, Perugia books have all been written in English, but one thing that draws them together over time is also the interrogation of English as a monolith, or the inclusion of other languages other than English, even if the primary text is in English, variations within English, and just multiple ways of saying. So I'm just going to show you a few to kind of bring that to light. So this one is Rebecca Pelkey's Through a Red Place, and that incorporates poems in Mohegan, written by the poet Rebecca Pelkey, and they're translated into English, and that's to honor the poet's Native American heritage. We have uh, Abby Murray's Hail and Farewell. Um, this book, in part, explores how terms are used as weapons of exclusion in military and civilian spaces. Um, Jackie Balderrama is Now in Color. This traces language acquisition and loss through the poet's multi-generational family, and it considers its impact on her identity as a non-Spanish speaking Latina. So there are poems in here that she calls Spanish definition poems, that are using a Spanish word as their title, and we have them in boxes, so they're almost like a little dictionary. So a lot of design work goes into these books, but here's one of those. Um, uh, and so it's creating personal definitions, sort of a redefinition, redefining, as she's wrestling with not having grown up speaking Spanish and what that means for her as a Latina. Um, let's see, two of our books feature the dialect of Appalachia. So one of those is, I would say, maybe our most famous book over time. It's called Kettle Bottom, written by Diane Gilliam. And um, also, in addition to that, is Gloss by Ida Stewart. So both of these speak from Appalachia. This book also enacts speech as the mountains speaking. So it's kind of eco speech. And she plays with, it's a very playful book. She plays with the word language itself, making language and thinking about the land and the mountains being stripped of coal. Um, so those are literally just a few. As we had an AWP panel several years ago that was centered around language, and it was not hard to find our books that that touch on those. So um,
I love that title, gloss, even.
yeah,
There's so much in that where, women as first readers often were only allowed the Bible and only if it was glossed, which
yes,
is to say, they were instructed how to read, that not how they were supposed to interpret. Um, which has always been interesting to me, and that book is supposed, there are those who believe that that book speaks the truth, not a truth, many truths or the truth. And yet, if you've got to gloss it, it seems pretty obvious that, so, what I'd like to move, you had talked about the the poem, the what the by the time through this winnowing process, by the time a collection has reached there, it's pretty much fully realized as a collection. And I
Hmm.
think that's one thing that I'd like to talk about also would be, books that are conceived, novels or memoirs or poetic sequences or poems, books of poems that have a very strong thematic thing. Those are kind of conceived from the beginning as a whole. But when you go to have a collection, whether it's a collection of poems, or a collection of short stories or a collection of essays. I think that it applies to all of those types of collections where the discrete parts were written, and then you think, well, I have a pile of poems, but do I have a book? So I wondered, what kind of advice you might have to offer about how an aspiring writer makes conceives of a collection as opposed to just a pile of individual pieces.
Great question. Yeah. I keep thinking back. I've been spending time with your book, and so thinking about that biblical um, little tributary you just went on there. I mean, you bring up the Bible and saints, and one quick thing I just want to say that before we move on to the pile of poems versus the manuscript, um,
Mhm.
is another sort of at the very root of language. There's pronouns, and that at one point in your book you reference Elizabeth Bishop's The Waiting Room and that idea of the poet's discovery of the self
Mhm.
as an I or an Elizabeth. And yeah, I think that goes into then like gendered pronouns as well. And our books being by women, our poets are also interrogating what it means to be a girl or a woman, a she
Mhm.
versus a he versus a they, or maybe it's a combination of those things. So I loved your book. I feel like is very much in conversation with a lot of these things. So yes, to answer your question about the pile of poems versus a collection, I definitely have things to say. I mean, the books that rise to the top at Perugia are by poets who really have a sense of their work. We're probably not going to pick a winner that needs a lot of reorganization, because one of the things that readers may have seen over time is that the book makes a journey that makes sense to itself, that it has a vocabulary that speaks to itself, that it's has an arc that makes a lot of sense. So the poets who, and it's not that only one book could win. I mean, we get over 600 submissions some years, and there are so many strong ones. But those strong ones have in common that they know themselves, that they if they are a project book, they know why. And if they are a pile of poems, they're artfully arranged so that they speak to one another and create that arc or journey or have that almost like the book might have a vocabulary. You might see repeated images or um, language, words that repeats. And then, so there's those things that are you would find as common threads through a book. And then sometimes a book is also really benefits from diversity of that grammar, diversity of form, kind of. And when we think about engaging the reader, it's interesting to have a book that might be even a hybrid book that some of our books have. Our latest collection has photographs in it, erasures from the author's own diary from when she was 14, historic archival work. Um, and we've done that more than once now in our books, and that's really exciting. So anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent, but I find as an editor looking at Perugia's books that I don't they've already been edited intimately, or I was going to say I look at them then intimately, and rather meticulously. So there might be new poems that come in and out of a book. We might reconsider a title. Sometimes the order shifted a little, but it's generally already found its way by the time it reaches to us. So in terms of advice I would have about doing that, I guess I first want to shine the spotlight again back on you because we're celebrating your book this year through this podcast. And I found your book so interesting in the way that it was organized. The life stages, the seasons, that wheel of the seasons, I think is how you describe it at one point.
Mhm.
And its braiding really felt like life to me, like the way that you're living life in your present spaces and places and age and what you're witnessing and what you're taking in. And it has, of course, the observant eye of a poet. It's a nonfiction, but you're a poet, and it's just so beautifully written. But then it echoes back, so it's never just present. And it's a little bit like those uncertain acrobats. Like there's a lot of swinging back and forth between present and past, and how the past informs the present. Um, how those two intertwine. I think braiding's a really good word for your book.
You know,
And it's linear in some ways, but it's also like circular and cyclical.
yes, yes. Well, thank you for that. And it's, my first book of, I have three books of poetry, and now the latest one, Almanac, is memoir, creative nonfiction, somewhere in there. It has prose poetry in it as well. Thank you. But my first book was a collection of poetry. My third book is a collection of poetry. The middle book, the second book, Appetite for the Divine, is a poetic sequence. And at some point, it Almanac owes something of its organizational to what I learned from writing Appetite for the Divine. And
Mm.
as you say, it's got sort of the wheel of the seasons. It is an almanac. It is linear in that it's a memoir. I'm 4 years old at the beginning and, this age at the end. But within that scaffolding, I use the word murmuration for the subtitle because, like, everybody knows what a murmuration is, but not everyone knows the word. It's, when birds lift into a flock where it's individual birds, but they're doing this congregate motion. And, there are topics, national origin stories, the climate emergency, consideration of language and the ways in which language allows us to perceive the world and to express the world, but also blinds us in many ways. So there's a lot of different topics within it, a murmuration, I like to think. So,
Oh,
um,
it's a beautiful way of organizing. And I love how at one point in the book you say that early on in your life, reading Nancy Drew gave you your kind of first lessons in narrative structure.
it's
It's just
true.
great.
Yeah, it was an insight for me to recognize that that's where I had picked it up from. But yes, you read those books like that, and there is a solid order, and it makes you sort of understand those formulas. I've always been interested that there's a lot of poets that write creative nonfiction, and
Mhm.
creative nonfiction seems to be the place where prose gets to play with form more than any other. And I think that I think that's whether it's that's what draws poets to creative nonfiction, or whether poets helped create that in creative nonfiction, I'm not certain. But I do see uh, a connection there. Um, so just briefly, while we're still on organization and shape, tell us a little bit about, we talked a little bit about the shape of uncertain acrobats, but what about your new book?
Yeah, it's so funny. One of my poet friends is the poet Nathan McLean, and I heard him on a podcast talking about his second book and how like, oh no, it turned out to be the same exact shape as his first book, and that totally happened to me.
Ah,
So my first book is Uncertain Acrobats that I showed you, and I have this little sneak peek
Uh,
This is my new book that's coming out, and I got a proof copy.
wow.
So this is its beautiful self in real life.
Right.
Um, Published by the same press, Kevin Carey Press, and both books have a proem. They start with a sort of a pre-poem, and they're organized in three sections. So that's the form, basically.
Mhm.
Um, they're definitely pretty narratively linear in terms of my Uncertain Acrobat starts with my childhood and my relationship with my father, and the middle section then moves into his being sick with cancer, and then the third moves into his the aftermath of his death and my grief. And those do, I think, echo back with one another the way, grief surprises us, or we'll hear someone's voice or feel like we see them. We have a visitation or something with, someone who is no longer with us. So I feel like those sections kind of play with moving back and forth in time a little bit. Same thing for my recent book, my upcoming forthcoming book, I should say.
Mhm.
Um, it begins in my childhood. So my first book is about my father, and the second book is really woman steeped in women and girls. So it begins with growing up with my mom, who was a single mom, so I moved between them. Um, my growing up in Gloucester, so it's very much about place. I love your work for that, and some of our work speaks to each other in terms of like a coastal kind of place, and girlhood, and then it moves into and in that girlhood, it explores some early friendships, and then the middle section is about my best friend who died in 2020 of breast cancer. So those are all poems for her, and for friendship. Um, And then the third part moves into me as mother, so my own children. But my mother shows up throughout as well. So yeah, that's how mine is organized. I mean, in terms of how did I know when I didn't just have a pile of poems and I had a book?
Mhm.
Um, Neither one of these started out before I wrote the poems as I'm going to write a book that's shaped this way and make all of these poems. No, it was a process of discovery. Um, and in particular, I would say for my first book, this is just a really interesting story. And I hope it helps other writers who are just coming up. I mean, first of all, I sent it out 60 times before it was accepted. So persevere is one
Yeah,
lesson.
absolutely.
Um, and I was sending it out. It was at that time, at most of that time, half about my father. And I'd written these poems that were very raw about illness and grief. And that's when we write, right? When we're trying to figure
Mhm.
things out and when we're in these intense emotions, often difficult ones rather than joy. But so I wrote a lot of those. And then the other half of the book was elegiac, but for other people I had lost. And I always worried, oh, the book is too heavy. It's all about grief. Oh no.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it has no sense of humor. And I think that's an important thing to think about, tone.
Yeah.
And who wants to just read a book all about dead people? Well, maybe people do, but they kind of have to be introduced to who those dead people are in
Mhm.
life in order to then feel that loss and kind of relate those dead people to their own dead people and their own alive
Mhm.
people. So that's what we're trying to do with our writing is find that place that feels universal where my father's death speaks to you because of your father's death or something like that. And so
Mhm.
that was actually something that the press worked with me on. They said Kevin Carey loved the book, and that was really wonderful. But they said, we're not quite ready to say yes to you. We feel like these stories about your dad are the primary part of this. That's the heart.
Mhm.
And all of these other stories are kind of taking away from that. Like, let that be the heart, but also let us know about him and you and your life together, so that when he dies that we miss him also as a
That,
real person.
that was a real gift from
It
Kevin Carey to
was.
help you, because I loved what you said about it being a process of discovery. Um, when you do a collection that's truly a collection, not, with a strong thematic or where you haven't written the poems already understanding the arc. It to get where you're trying to figure out what makes this a collection, that is another whole you really need that stepping back, and that is a whole process of discovery right there. Um, it's, you were fortunate to have an editor say, we love these poems, but here's how we're seeing it going together, and to give you an opportunity to do that. So that's really, really, really valuable. I have one quick question for you about that. We're going to, at the end of the podcast, I do have like a little list of some resources to continue this conversation about organizing collections. Um, but when I talk with students about this, it's very, very common for students or for aspiring poets, for people that are doing this for the first time, to think this is the earliest poem, so it must come first, and then go forward, just uh, in time, just chronological. And I always say to them, if that's not a bang up poem, if that's not one of your strongest poems, don't put it first, because it comes in with 600 other entries. And
Absolutely.
you need to really grab the reader's attention with that first one. And I tell them that, yeah, I think that it needs to have a sense of itself as a collection. But if you have started with one strong poem that's a little bit out of place, the editor's not going to mind saying, yeah, we love your collection. We're going to take, this one doesn't really belong there. And you just say, oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah,
That you do need something really strong at the beginning and at the end.
absolutely. Yeah, definitely editing happens with every book. So
Hmm.
you want to make sure you get in the door and have someone, continue to read.
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
Yep.
So at this point, I'd like to move on to our topic of literary citizenship. And I know that you have a lot of you participate you by being an editor, and this careful attention you pay to the books and trying to design them beautifully and get them out there. You certainly are a literary citizen yourself, but I know that you also have, you know, you're aware of other options and other avenues for that. So what about literary citizenship? What you said about the avenues and the importance of creating a literary community?
I mean, literary community is everything. Um, I would say that reflects back to the last question about organizing your book. I have two different writing groups who
Um,
looked at my books as wholes, and we do that for one another. Um, so one way is just within your own writing communities, to have them, to be getting other perspectives, to be sharing your work with other people. It's just such a gift that people can do for you and you can do for them. And also your own writing just grows the more you read others and think about how people are making their poems and making their books. And so it's just this kind of cyclical thing where it's not transactional. It's like feeding other people, and then you're also feeding yourself and your own writing, which I love. So yeah, I've been in many different writing groups, a couple of them really long term. Um, One of them, we have kind of an accountability group, so we share our goals every month and whenever and kind of how we did or didn't do with those the next month. But also whenever anyone has a book to share, we'll do that with each other. And four of those members that have a book coming out within the same year, including me this year. So that's pretty exciting. So just community in terms of just having another set of eyes on your work, but also what it brings to your craft, and your care. I mean, reflecting on just how I know you,
Mhm.
I feel like our relationship is a really good model and like a lovely model of literary citizenship. So I just want to shout you out again. You were a faculty mentor for Abby Murray, um, and that Abby's book, their book ended up going on to win the Perugia Press
Yeah,
Prize.
yeah.
And when this came out, Abby was invited to SUNY Binghamton, and I was too, because you all were celebrating not just the book and the former student, but also the press that published the book. And that was just so lovely. And I got to talk to students and um, at SUNY Binghamton and share the writing life with them. And then because we met, you became a reader for Perugia. And then I became a reader for Wilkes
Right,
because of you
right.
teaching there. And here we are celebrating this book. And so I feel like out of that, I just want to say like community is to be fostered. It's about building relationships,
Mhm.
celebrating each other's gifts and accomplishments. Like you're doing that so beautifully. This podcast, you had a new book this year and you've created this way to celebrate your book while showcasing others at the
Right,
same
right.
time.
Yes.
You're championing their work. It's a really generous spirit, and I think generosity is a really important word to keep in mind when we're thinking about building community. And the themes of your episodes have also done that. Like they've been about community gardening and connection and building
Mhm.
with the earth, more than just humans, and how literature can build bridges. And so I just want to bring it back to Perugia for a second too. You said something in your first episode that was a lot about community gardening,
Mhm.
and connections to earth. And you said something like it's as if the connections are growing with humans as well as the plants. And I thought like
Mhm.
that's the same at Perugia. We're growing our library, right? Every time we publish a book, we're growing our catalog, but we're also our press community grows. And
Right.
so I just think about that really intentionally that we're trying to we've created a sisterhood, a community of poets who care about each other and support one another. They'll have readings with each other. They'll review each other's books. They'll be excited to shout out each other's successes on social media and so on. And I mean, collaborating, writing books together, it goes on and on. So it's super important to me. I feel like the way you're celebrating your book and our relationship is a model of how
Mhm.
that can be done. It's super important to our press. I just couldn't write in without my community. And I feel like literary citizenship is just part of part of the way that you um, pay it forward with others, and then it does ripple back to you when you need it, and that just helps not only um, other folks but yourself. So it's just this beautiful circle. Yeah.
Right. It nourishes one another.
Hmm.
And I often try to emphasize to uh, you know, I I don't I live in a very rural area. I have a lot of friends that are not, I have a lot of friends that are not interested in poetry particularly, though they have, through knowing me, they've ended up reading some poetry and stuff, but it was not part of their life. It wasn't somebody that I'm going to have a writing group with. Now with Zoom and things like that, it is a lot easier, I think, for people isolated like that to make those sorts of connections. But one thing that I try to emphasize is if there isn't literary community going on where you are, you need to create it.
Hmm.
And there's certainly, whether it's, offering readings or organizing a writing group at a local library, or there's even, as you say, just on social media to be championing one another. There are so many ways to be, sharing on Goodreads and things like that. There are, um, you can't just wait for literary community to happen for you. You need to be part of making it, to having it having it exist. So
Absolutely.
yeah, just well, this has been wonderful talking with you. I want to put up the slide of the other resources.
Oh, your
Um,
resources are terrific too. You shared those with me ahead, and you had shared some of the same ones that I also would have suggested
okay.
for folks.
Yeah, so there are, I actually have an even more extensive list when I speak with students at Wilkes about this, but I thought that these were a good start of places to look. So there is quite a lot of help, those two series of articles from Kelly Russell Agadon and from she's with Two Sylvia's Press, and
Mhm.
Jeffrey Levine of Tupelo Press. Both of them have really excellent series of articles about compiling a poetry manuscript. And as I said, I think that any sort of collection, that the advice that they give, whether your collection is short stories, essays, or poetry, that there is advice there that can help you. And then a number of different individual articles that are out there. And there are at least two full-length, print books about it. And there's an online book from Alberto Rios, who's a
Mm.
poet himself. A lot of these are written by people who are poets themselves. Um, but hopefully there's a little extra for people that are interested in that. So I just want to, thank you for being a part of this, Rebecca, and I know that your insights and advice are going to be helpful to a lot of people. So thank you so much for being part of this and just
Thank you for including me, Christine. Really, I'm
sure.
so happy for you about your book, and
Oh,
just
well,
thrilled to help celebrate it.
I'm really looking forward to your new book coming out, Singing from the Deep End, which is a wonderful title again. Um, so it's been a delight to talk with you this morning, and see you soon.
Thank you. Hope so.